Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Robert Huish, who is an associate professor in development studies at Dalhouse University in Halifax in Canada. First of all, welcome to the programme. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. Perhaps we can start, what is Donald Trump's endgame? What is his aim here with this oil stranglehold? What kind of deal does he want from Cuba?
Well, I think there's two folds of pressure on the U.S. strategy on Cuba right now. And the first is for Donald Trump to try to flex as much as he can as having influence throughout the entire hemisphere. So in the Americas, we have seen repeated bellicosity by Donald Trump. If it's at Greenland, if it's at Canada, if it's now at Cuba or Mexico. So that's sort of keeping to the Trump script. But underneath Trump, we have Marco Rubio, who has been a long time advocate of democratic change and regime change in Cuba. And I believe that Mr. Rubio's strategy here is to put breaking pressure on the Cuban government so that there's going to be some sort of forced transition within that country. And right now, the pressure that's being applied is by creating an already tense embargo on Cuba and making it a total stranglehold. And that capture of Nicolas Maduro and hereby taking control of Venezuela's exports is really putting that down to the mat right now.
You know, what is the likelihood of that succeeding? I think Axios is reporting that Rubio is meeting or has met with the grandson of Raul Castro, the former leader of Cuba. That's just being reported. We can't confirm it. You know, how likely is this to work?
I don't think there's much of a chance of this. And there's some serious short-sightedness within this plan. And the first one is that there is simply, if there was a push here to create democracy in Cuba or regime change, it would require some sort of functioning opposition to exist. And Cuba doesn't have that. There's no opposition in exile as it was in Venezuela. So there's no one to fill a power vacuum if this plan succeeded. Secondly, the Cuban government has been through this before. They have routinely been put up against economic measures and economic weaponry by Washington, and they have plans in place to get through it. In particular, in the 1990s, under Bill Clinton, the strengthening of the Cuban embargo tightened to its pretty much maximum capacity, and the country went ahead with it. But right now, the bigger issue for Rubio to think through is the demographics of Cuba. Almost 2 million people have left Cuba since the end of 2021. And now you have just a bit over 2 million exiles living in the US. And from Mr. Rubio's point of view, the idea is that if you were to break the Cuban government, then thereby you could probably win every county for the next election in Florida. But it doesn't get to the reality of how a power vacuum is filled or how a potential humanitarian crisis could be managed.
Just you're talking there about the potential humanitarian crisis. We saw the Cuban foreign minister in Moscow today. What might Cuba expect from Russia or indeed any other outside powers? Any kind of intervention or help forthcoming from outside countries?
Yeah, it would be very wise for many countries other than Russia to start bringing some assistance to Cuba, and not necessarily in terms of foreign aid, but in terms of opening up trade and keeping that alive. Mexico has done that. Canada, France, Italy have done that throughout the history of the Cuban embargo. But right now with Russia, the idea on the table is that more energy would be shipped from Russia to Cuba. Now that would be very tricky to do because Russia's already lost quite a bit of its export market since the war in Ukraine, but also the dependence on their shadow fleet to try to traverse the Atlantic on heavily sanctioned vessels would be a very costly and difficult endeavor. So right now, Mexico has actually sent energy into Cuba, a few shipments at a time. It's just barely keeping the lights on. Some estimates are to say that Cuba will be completely out of energy in about 3 months. Some of the embassies are even putting plans in for leaving their missions if it comes to that. And even the Cuban government is prepared to transition into martial law if it really gets that severe. But we're seeing that there's other things that have been dropped off. Tourism trade is right down in Cuba. Many Canadian airlines, Canadians making one of the largest markets for tourism in Cuba, all flights have been suspended because of the lack of opportunity to refuel. Some European flights continue to come in, but they're going to be refueling in a third country like Mexico to get it there. And with the other factor here is the food production in Cuba is also in dire straits. As you mentioned, the waste disposal, that's a big problem. It's created tropical disease outbreaks like chikungunya or Opucho virus. Those are absolutely surging. We've seen even in the last year, the infant mortality rate in Cuba has gone from about 1,000 live births in 2021 to almost 15 per thousand in late 2025. So you combine the lack of resources and also the lack of people, 2 million people having left Cuba, many of them educated professional class, you have a situation here where you do not have as much resilience to build and build back. And so it's going to require energy, it's going to require food, it's going to require medicine, and it's going to require continued and open trade to get Cuba's economy on some level playing again.
Just you did talk a little there about previous administrations and the relationship with Cuba. And Barack Obama, I think in the second term, did try this rapprochement, which was then reversed after he left office in Trump's first term. Did that yield anything, brief as it was?
Yes, I mean those were sort of the golden moments in Cuba-U.S. relationships. In one shot, it brought more Americans to Cuba as tourists or as family visitors during that period. I think Cuba was banking on a lot more U.S. tourism to come into the country, kind of like how it works with resort tourism in Canada, but that didn't happen. But it also opened the opportunity for very important partnerships. It led to partnerships in healthcare research, also in sport. There was deals made between or in the making between the Cuban government and Major League Baseball, for example. And by breaking down that stranglehold, it actually facilitated more natural relations between the two countries. Cuba's only 90 miles off the south of Florida, and there's a huge expatriate community there. Pretty much everyone in Cuba has a relative in Florida to some degree. So by opening that up, made a lot of sense. And it also opened the opportunity for foreign investment to come in and create restaurants, paladares, as they call them, even some merchant shops were on the table there. Interestingly enough, that did catch Donald Trump's attention when he came in for his first term, and he started making some noise about creating resorts in Veradero or creating golf courses in that way. But since Trump was in his first term, Mr. Biden didn't really reverse as much a policy to go back to the Obama days. And now with Trump 2.0, we're seeing this total stranglehold on Cuba's economy, and that spiked off very serious inflation, and also the lack of energy. The fact also is that there's been such an outmigration of Cubans leaving that companies who are in charge of energy production, mining, fixing the garbage trucks, if you will, there's no engineers left. They've all gone. They're in the US, they're in South America, or they've gone off to Spain. So this will be the first time when that professional class of Cubans won't be physically present to be there to handle this crisis. And as a result, Russia is seeing an opportunity to solidify that partnership, something they've already done the last couple of years, with some 5,000 Cubans actually signing up to be mercenaries to fight along Russian troops against Ukraine.